Elizabeth Holmes promised the world a medical revolution. At 19, she claimed to have invented a miniaturised machine that, with a single drop of blood, could map our health. Her boast was serious diseases like cancer would be prevented before they happened. And it was not only a wow moment for patients. High-profile investors poured a fortune into Elizabeth Holmes' company, Theranos. Their money guaranteed she became Silicon Valley's first self-made female billionaire. But her invention was an invention. It didn't work. Elizabeth Holmes is no visionary. She's a fraudster who's risked people's lives and, if convicted, faces 20 years.
It's finding what you're born to do. When you really give everything to that, then you can realize great things.
Holmes was making the greatest promise of all, that she could save lives through a revolutionary blood testing device she had created, and which she would make available to all through supermarkets and pharmacies.
Theranos means being able to see the onset of disease in time to be able to do something about it.
I'd like to welcome Elizabeth Holmes.
The real treat, the incredible Elizabeth Holmes.
California's Silicon Valley and some of the richest people in the world bought the dream.
There are people in this world who revolutionize our lives: Coco Chanel, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Walt Disney, and Elizabeth Holmes. Mark my words.
Turning Theranos into a staggering $9 billion juggernaut and making Holmes the Tech Valley's first self-made female billionaire.
You founded this company 12 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Tell them how old you were.
I was 19.
Celebrity commentators and cashed-up investors couldn't get enough of this new kid on the block.
In Silicon Valley, she was the new darling, and a lot of that was because she was a woman entrepreneur, which is a very popular thing. It's been a man's world, you know, for so long. She would wear black turtlenecks like Steve Jobs and sold her little tale, and everybody bought it for a while.
The revolution promised by Elizabeth Holmes was to put preventative health care at our fingertips, quite literally. All it would take would be one tiny drop of blood from a finger prick, from which to run hundreds of blood tests using a groundbreaking miniaturised testing device which would deliver more reliable, faster and cheaper results.
People don't like big needles being stuck into their arm. Part of it...
You're one of those people, right?
Deeply so, yes.
Elizabeth's machine would wipe out the traditional way of doing things. Larger volumes of blood drawn from the arm by big needles, and costly and time-consuming lab analysis. The mission was to enable everyone to get blood tests as frequently as once a month, to build a personal health profile, and to catch diseases like cancer at their earliest.
People don't even know that they have a basic human right to be able to get access to information about themselves and their own bodies that can change their lives.
But as whistleblowers would expose, the Elizabeth Holmes revolution turned out to be an extraordinary fraud. A lie that put lives in jeopardy. Were you ever asked to falsify data or destroy data?
Oh, just get rid of these tests that you've run.
Wiped out nearly $1 billion of investors' money.
There was no money to be had. It all just evaporated.
Any comment at all to the investors?
And may well end with Holmes behind bars for up to 20 years, come her fraud trial later this month.
Ms. Holmes, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
How would you describe the rise and then the fall of Elizabeth Holmes?
Well, I think it is a commentary on Silicon Valley's culture. There's so much hyping, so much exaggerating in this culture that, you know, young entrepreneurs are basically bred to behave this way.
And as investigative journalist John Carreyrou found, there were plenty of people in the room willing to drink the Kool-Aid, all hoping to crack the unicorn club, the billion-dollar startups emerging in Silicon Valley at the time.
This was the unicorn boom, and this was 2015, and things were getting really frothy in Silicon Valley, and people didn't want to miss the next Facebook. And a lot of people wanted to get on board this next rocket ship to riches.
When she first interviewed me, I have to say I was a bit starstruck.
Science graduate Erica Chung was not out to get rich, she just wanted a job. And Theranos, with Ernest Elizabeth Holmes at the helm, was the dream pick.
I was really enthusiastic as sort of a young scientist to work for a company that seemed to have a compelling vision and a strong leader who seemed to back it as well.
But Erica was shocked to find the Theranos dream was in fact a fairy tale, peddled by Holmes and Chief Operating Officer Ramesh Sunny Balwani, Elizabeth's boyfriend at the time. For all the excitement, the little black box simply did not work. It could not do what the pair claimed.
The reality of working at Theranos was that a lot of the things that were being said about the company were not actually what was going on behind closed doors. This new revolutionary device, it wasn't actually in existence. It hadn't quite been built yet.
Worse, they were using a jerry-rigged version of the machine to run patients' blood tests. The results were often false or misleading, but this too was hidden from an unsuspecting public, despite the significant health risks.
I just wanted people to know that they were leveraging this faulty device to test on patients, and that needed to be stopped.
Rumours of Theranos' bad practice were circulating. But it was journalist John Carreyrou from the Wall Street Journal who would be the first to start investigating after a tip-off from a sceptical pathologist.
Things, began to come into focus for me, and I realized that, this was not just a business fraud and a corporate fraud, but potentially a fraud that had big implications for the public health. And so I thought, well, this is a big story.
For all the hope and hype, Elizabeth Holmes was now accused of being a fake. But as it would become clear, the consequences of her fraud were real and dangerous.
This is inexcusable, now and forever.
The remarkable story of healthcare startup company Theranos and its founder, Elizabeth Holmes, starts at Stanford University in 2003.
This used to be my advisor's office. We got in.
At just 19, and after just 2 semesters studying chemical engineering, Holmes dropped out of university to become a medical technology entrepreneur.
Another few classes in chemical engineering was not necessary for what I wanted to do.
One of the first to hear her future business plans was Stanford University Professor of Medicine, Dr. Phyllis Gardner. Unlike most who encountered Holmes, Dr. Gardner was not impressed. Did Elizabeth Holmes always have big dreams, in your opinion?
Absolutely. Her ambition was over the top. And unfortunately, the person who twice introduced her to me said, she's just brilliant. She's brilliant. And when you're surrounded by Nobel laureates, you take that with a grain of salt, a boulder of salt. She had no knowledge of medicine and a rudimentary knowledge of engineering, and she was 19. And she really didn't want any expertise. She thought she knew it all. Well, you don't at 19, I'm sorry.
But right from the start, Elizabeth Holmes knew the power of PR.
I believe the individual is the answer to the challenges of healthcare.
She didn't bother proving her so-called groundbreaking blood testing device could do all she promised through peer reviews or releasing extensive data.
Let's take these tests and make them accessible.
Instead, she gathered a war council to her board, reveling in their fame and credibility.
So it includes 3 former U.S. cabinet secretaries, 2 former U.S. senators, a retired Navy admiral, and a retired Marine Corps general, including George Shultz, Henry Kissinger. How did you make that happen?
The board was George Shultz, Jim Mattis, Henry Kissinger, and a bunch of 4-star generals. And someone said, this is like a board that's going to take over the world. And, but what does it have to do with medical advancements? Nothing. And so everyone was duped. Silicon Valley really had egg on its face over this thing.
But initially, like so many, small-time investor Eileen Lepra was impressed after she was advised to sink a hard-earned $100,000 into Theranos. Was there something about the nature of what Elizabeth Holmes was hoping to do, promising to do, that attracted you to this type of investment? Was there anything altruistic about it?
Not for me. I was looking to make money. But I worked for a venture capitalist at the time, and he said it would be equivalent to Apple and to get as many shares as I could.
No matter there was no evidence, the money flowing into Theranos was huge, almost $1 billion. At one time, Rupert Murdoch was the single biggest investor, buying $125 million worth of shares. Coincidentally, as the proprietor of the Wall Street Journal, he was also investigative journalist John Carreyrou's boss at the time Carreyrou exposed Holmes's spin as lies. To invest that sort of money without any real data, any peer reviews, I mean, did that surprise you?
As it relates to Murdoch, he kind of operates from the gut, and mostly he's been right. As for the other investors, certainly, they should have done more due diligence. I think it was a deliberate choice of Elizabeth's to focus on what I would call uncharitably the dumb money, the billionaires and their family offices, as opposed to the sophisticated Silicon Valley venture funds, who I don't think they would have fallen for the same lies.
What do you think of the investors who lined up to give her nearly $1 billion worth of money?
Older white men, right? I'm telling you, I've said it, brains going south.
They weren't thinking with their brains, is what you're saying.
Uh-huh. I don't know, and they believed her. And she could be charming. She could be, I'm sure. It just didn't charm me, but she could be charming to older men.
Giving people the right to obtain a laboratory test will, by definition, begin the process of enabling them to engage in their health.
Ms. Holmes, you are magnificent.
With Elizabeth's charm offensive in full flight, results back in the lab were going from bad to worse, according to former lab associate Erica Chung.
They were producing really wildly inaccurate and imprecise results on a consistent basis across many different types of blood tests. Tests like hepatitis C, or your thyroid test, or tests that would be predictive of cancer. It's telling us very clearly we need to stop testing patients.
Every person should have the ability to get that type of test.
But Elizabeth was not listening, desperate for her technology to catch up with her vision.
Your health is really important to us, the kids.
Of all those taken in by the Theranos mania, it would be patients who had the most to lose.
Because nothing is more important than the health of those you love.
It was just a big fraud. And if you can perpetrate a fraud, smile about it, go to White House dinners, that to me is just no conscience.
This notion that she was faking it until she could make it, do you think that she ever believed herself in what she could do?
Possibly. Probably. I mean, it's almost like in another fantasy world, an egoism that I can't describe. I don't have that. I doubt you have that. Fake it till you make it. Excuse me, on patients? I don't think so.
What is your view of that? That they're happy to go live with a system that's still being tested? and is actually failing.
Yeah, it's unconscionable. It's unethical. It's immoral. There's, all the words you can think about to describe that.
And in Australia, why the Elizabeth Holmes miniature black box was never going to work.
She could never do what she claimed she could do.
Founder and CEO of startup company Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, was promising to make possible the impossible in the name of preventative medicine.
The issue comes that she tried to essentially take an entire pathology lab and squish it into a little black box and promised to be able to do all those tests all the time for people. And it takes years and years to develop a single one of those tests up to the standard where it can be accurate. So it was, ambitious doesn't quite capture it, but it was incredibly ambitious.
Medical scientist Dr. Darren Saunders from Sydney University has keenly followed the rise of Elizabeth Holmes and her promise that this mini lab could run hundreds of blood tests off just one drop of blood. His expertise in the field made him incredulous right from the start.
Over the last 11 years, we've reinvented the traditional laboratory infrastructure.
It's quite a weird thing to watch happen because you feel like shouting the emperor's not wearing any clothes, right? And as a scientist, it was, I think frustrating is the word I'd use, incredibly frustrating, because you felt like taking these people aside and going, look, there's nothing going on here. Why are you spending so much money on something that there's no proof that it exists?
That was the phrase I always used. It was exactly that. The emperor has no clothes. And that is the perfect metaphor for what it was like.
Across the world, Dr. Phyllis Gardner was equally disturbed. As a professor at Steinfort University, she knew Elizabeth Holmes as a student there.
Up until that point, the way that they had to draw blood is
before she famously dropped out and acquired the Steve Jobs attire.
So dehumanizing that it's an incredibly emotional process.
And before her voice changed.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. I started this company because...
And what about the deep voice? Did she have the deep voice when you were dealing with her?
No. I was shocked when I heard her voice because I'd met her before. That is a voice you don't forget in a woman. Oh, hello. Yes.
The right to protect the health and well-being.
Carefully crafted or otherwise, corporations were lining up to embrace Elizabeth Holmes. Her success was sealed when, in 2013, in a multi-million-dollar deal, Theranos was launched in pharmacy chain Walgreens.
We have an operational plan that will allow us to become within 5 miles of every person's home through the Walgreens that we've opened and are continuing to open nationally.
It was all about access and ease. Customers could get an in-store blood test off a simple finger prick, which would cost next to nothing. They'd even get their results back within 4 hours. That was the promise. The truth was another matter, according to former Theranos lab associate Erica Chung.
This thing that was supposed to be 5 would all of a sudden show up to be 60. And then you would run it and it would show up to be 4. And it was just the degree of inaccuracy was just way too high to be acceptable to start running on patients.
So I got my Theranos test done on 29th of July, and then 31st of July I got a test done by another lab, and it was different.
Unaware of the wildly unreliable results, Pallav Sharda, himself a physician turned medical technology entrepreneur, went to Walgreens for a Theranos blood test. The results were surprisingly bad for this health-conscious medico. They showed he was pre-diabetic. Luckily, Pallav's own doctor was suspicious of the diagnosis and ordered another blood test from another lab.
That was the moment when I felt cheated because there was a little bit of a pride hurt because I'm from the industry.
If you had not got a second opinion, a second test, what course of action would you have taken?
At age 35, I would have been started on anti-diabetic medication. And no medication comes without side effects. So I get emotional thinking about how big a deal it was for me.
If you followed the Theranos model, you would have been on medication for a disease you don't have.
Yes, absolutely. This is inexcusable now and forever.
Was it a fact that there were illnesses that might not have been picked up, that there are people who might have been suffering from life-threatening diseases and they just didn't know it because they got a false result?
Yeah, the devices were so unreliable that you really couldn't trust it with any test.
The groundbreaking Theranos technology was a charade. Instead, Theranos was secretly using traditional, commercially available blood analyzers. Because those machines require larger amounts of blood to run their tests, staff were ordered to dilute the small blood samples collected by finger prick, rendering those results unsafe.
They were doing the tests on standard equipment and they were diluting the blood, which invalidates a lot of the results. So I knew there was fraud going on, and from very early on.
But still, the marketing myth continued.
And you make a decision to do something, you do it, and that's it.
A previously non-existent lab was created, filled with as many of the black boxes the company could find. Then Vice President Joe Biden was invited to inspect.
This is sort of the laboratory of the future.
Unaware the devices didn't work and that he, along with the world, was being conned. To learn that she created a fake lab to show Joe Biden, I mean, what an audacious act of deception.
Well, she was audacious, I would grant you that, and everything she did. I do think there's some, this is my opinion, that there's some sociopathy involved. And the ability to lie and without caring is not normal from my perspective as a medical doctor.
She was trying to overpromise and then hope that her engineers and her biochemists would catch up, and that when they eventually did and that her machine worked, no one would be the wiser. The problem is she was nowhere near ready.
Elizabeth Holmes was revered as the superwoman scientist come to rescue and revolutionise the US health system. But the true heroes of the Theranos tale are the courageous whistleblowers who helped investigative journalist John Carreyrou from the Wall Street Journal expose the sham. Off their testimonies, he went on to write the award-winning Bad Blood and is hosting a podcast called Bad Blood, The Final Chapter. These are people who wanted to do good. These are people who couldn't sleep at night because they were worried that patients were relying on false results.
Right.
Did that strike you as well?
They couldn't, in good conscience, continue to not say anything. They felt the need to speak up, and they felt that lives were in danger and that the longer this went on, the worse it would get.
Erica Chung was one such hero. When her concerns were ignored by Theranos, she left in disgust, but still feared for its customers. Erica alerted regulators to what was going on behind closed doors. You were being extraordinarily brave.
Yes.
You clearly felt compelled to get someone else in.
Even though it was scary and it was nerve-wracking, and at that time, Theranos was at least threatening to sue me, and they were following me to sort of intimidate me and to not speak up against them. It's just that they needed to stop doing this thing, right? They needed to stop testing on patients, and that the truth needed to be uncovered.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
Elizabeth Holmes came out fighting, but regulators acted against her, closing down Theranos laboratories and banning medical testing after they found massive fraud that put patients in serious jeopardy. The company, once valued at $9 billion, was now worth zero.
And that was good, right? Like the mission was finally accomplished. By that point, I was able to finally sleep at night and realize that, you know, my work was done.
In further legal action, Elizabeth and ex-boyfriend Sunny Balwani are now in the midst of a delayed criminal trial for defrauding investors, patients and doctors, and could be jailed for up to 20 years if convicted. Holmes' trial has been pushed back to the end of this month, first by COVID and then news she was expecting her first child, a son who was born in July.
To get pregnant when you're undergoing a trial is the height of irresponsibility in my mind. What about the baby?
Well, do you think this was a planned pregnancy or do you think it was an accident?
I definitely think it was. I mean, I was predicting it because it's the best way to garner sympathy, to try to keep herself out of prison.
I think she needs to go to prison for a while. I think 25 years sounds good.
Those closest to the Theranos dream, including investor Eileen Lepra, still believe Elizabeth Holmes should face the harshest sanctions because beyond money, so much was at stake.
Everybody knows it was all a sham. So why would you get a slap on the wrist? You know, if it was just money, that's one thing, but it's people's lives, their medical situations. That's not okay with anybody.
Hello, I'm Tara Brown. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minutes, segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.